Hello and welcome back to the garage. As ever, I am John and this is Kieran from the YouTube channel Mech'It Better. Now today we're going to be looking at the next in our series of basic bike maintenance videos, and specifically, Kieran, what will we be looking at?
We'll be looking at oil. So what is it, what does it do, how do we top it up, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's one of those jobs where it's super important to know this, so hopefully this one will be really helpful for you. As ever, we've got the Suzuki Address 110 and the Honda CG 125 to work on. There's a few other things which we might have a look at in a little while, but for now, let's just begin at the beginning. In the beginning then, there was oil. But what does oil actually do? Well, in your engine and in various other places in your bike, there are a lot of moving parts. And as the parts move against each other, they generate friction, which in turn generates heat. Now all of this process can cause damage. So the oil is there to reduce the friction, which reduces the heat, which reduces the damage. And for that reason, it's really important that you've got good quality oil in your bike and that you have the right amount of oil in your bike. But how do we check that the oil is of a good quality and that we have the right amount? Let's find out.
To check the level of the oil, your first port of call is level ground. So depending on whether you've got the dipstick type or the sight glass type, making sure we're level is a necessity. This is an example of a dipstick. Now it might vary depending on the bike that you have and look a little bit different, but the principle is the same. What it does, we have a minimum at the lowest point and a maximum at the highest point, and we can read the level from in between. So let's check it on the Suzuki Address.
The procedure for checking the oil level on the Suzuki Address is a little bit strange because you have to start and run the bike for 3 minutes and then shut it off and let it rest for 3 minutes and then check the oil level. In most bikes you wouldn't have to do that, but this being the Suzuki Address, this is what we're going to do. So Kieran, fire her up. Start your clock. Okay, well, we're going to call that 3 minutes. So Kieran, if you shut her off, please. And now we've just got to wait 3 minutes for the oil to settle. Well, 3 minutes have elapsed and it's time to check the oil level. So Kieran's going to unscrew the dipstick and bring that out and wipe off any oil that's on it already. And then what you need to do is slot that back into its little hole and rest it on the threads. We're not screwing that in, we're just resting it on the threads. Then you can bring that back out again and check where the oil level sits on the cross-hatched area towards the end. And to me that looks about, around about halfway, which is okay. It's nothing to worry about too much. You could top that up. Ideally we'd run it about 2/3 full. So we're just going to slot that back in and make sure that it's secured nicely back into the engine so it doesn't disappear as we're riding down the road. And that is how you check the oil level with a dipstick. Next up, we're going to look at bikes that have a sight glass, and the only bike I have with a sight glass is the Kawasaki GT750, so please forgive us, little bikes. We're going over to the big bike for a second.
Of all methods to check the oil, this is my favourite. We can wait around for a few minutes for the oil to settle, then we can look through this nice easy glass window to see that it's between the maximum and minimum mark, and we're all good to go.
What do we do then if we need to top up the oil? The first thing to do is to check your owner's manual to see what type of oil you need. In the case of the GT750 here, we need 10W40 motorbike oil. And I mention that because this is motorbike specific oil, and that's really important if you're putting it in a motorbike. You can, for example, get 10W40 car oil, which would be no good. So once you've checked your manual and you're happy that you've got exactly the right type of oil that you need, then you just need to fill it up. So let's have a look at that now. Here on the engine then, you can see this little cap, and that needs to be removed because that's where we're going to place the oil. So that just unscrews. I need to keep that somewhere safe. Next step is a clean funnel, which can go in there. And then you can add oil in small amounts and keep your eye on the sight glass, which is down here, until you get to around about 2/3, maybe 3/4 full. Generally, we always avoid filling right the way to full because it's hard to tell if you've gone over at that point. Whereas 2/3 or 3/4, you can at least see that there is a little bit of space left, and you'll be absolutely fine with that amount of oil. On the Suzuki Address 110, you don't have a separate hole for filling the oil, you just fill it through the dipstick hole. So as before, just top that up in small amounts, allow it to settle, and then read the measurement on the dipstick. On the CG125 it's exactly the same, you just remove the dipstick and fill through that hole. Again, in small increments, making sure that you're not overfilling as you go.
Over time, the engine oil will degrade and need replacing entirely. The intervals for this you'll find in the owner's manual, and it's typically a length of time or a certain mileage. But what do we look for in the difference between old and new oil? The new stuff is this nice golden syrup, whereas the old is much darker, much thinner, and generally looks quite rubbish. If you are unsure, then do consult a mechanic or your local garage. There are one or two other places on the bike that will need oil changing or inspecting, and we'll have a look at those now.
So as Kieran mentioned, there are other places on your bike that require an oil check and potentially an oil change. And the first one we'll look at is the forks. Now the front forks have oil in them which helps to smooth out your suspension, and over time that, like the engine oil, will degrade and need replacing. There is often not an easy way to check that you have the right amount of fluid or what the quality of the fluid is, so the easiest thing to do is to look in your owner's manual and see what the service interval is, and if you're near the service interval or if you're unsure if the oil's been changed, just replace it. It's a relatively easy job to do at home, but as with everything, if you're in doubt, just check with your local mechanic. If, like me, you have a scooter, then there's one last place that has oil that will need to be checked or changed, and that is back here by the rear wheel in the final drive unit. So we're going to have a quick look at how to check the level on this, and then we might discuss how to change it altogether. Here at the back of the bike is the final drive unit, and in the final drive unit is some oil. Now that's the level that we want to check. So the first thing to do, as ever, is have a look in your owner's manual and see what grade of oil you need to go in there. Make sure that that's correct, it is really important. Once you've got the correct grade of oil, you can remove the higher of these two plugs and simply put oil in there until it starts to overflow. And once it starts to overflow, that's the correct level. So clean everything up, put the top bottle back in, and job's a good one. Just like with the engine oil, the oil that's in the final drive unit will eventually need entirely replacing. And we're not going to get into the specifics of that job right now, but have a look in your owner's manual and see what the service interval is. In the case of the Suzuki Address 110 here, it's every 5,000 miles. So bear it in mind when you're doing work, and remember to change that as required.
One last thing to mention is the issue of overfilling. Now this can be just as damaging as not having enough oil. So if in any doubt, let a little bit out. Just make sure that level's right.
Well, there we are. That concludes our little look at motorcycle oil, topping up, checking, changing, and all the rest of it. Hopefully it was helpful for you.
Well, if you've got any questions or comments, then the usual thing, just drop them below and we'll do our best to get back to you.
We have, of course, got more of these videos coming in the future. We've got things like coolant to look at, punctures, clutch adjustment, tools, and a whole bunch more. So stick around and we'll see you on the next one. Ta-ra!